Hi everybody, it's good to see you all here for our second last Letters and Arts reading for this semester. This series of readings is brought to you courtesy of our own college, Banchow College, the Canada Council for the Arts, and the London Arts Council. We're very grateful for the support from all three of those fine organizations. Today we're here with writer Cara Lyn Morgan, and I'm going to ask my colleague Laurie Graham to introduce Cara Lyn for us.
Thank you, Roy. Hi, everybody. It's so good to see you all here. It's nearly reading break. We'll get to sleep soon. But thank you for coming to listen to poetry this afternoon. And I've got a very special poet to introduce to you today. Her name is Cara Lyn Morgan. I'm pleased to count her as my friend. We were students together at the University of Victoria about a decade ago now. And I'll tell you that the project of this book, what became my grieving ceremony, which is Cara Lyn's first book, the project of it seemed to start in those days at the University of Victoria, in the writing department there. She would come to workshop with these enormous, painful, grief-stricken, open-armed, love-based poems, and she would drag in all the details of her family and her various histories and the languages that her family used and have lost and are trying to reclaim. And the job was a really big one from the get-go. And what happens in this book is something quite amazing. You see a poet working through the oppressive histories that she has inherited, no less than residential schools and slavery. And you see her working through that history and showing it through the lens of a family, and a family that has warmth and love for each other, and has troubles and heartaches and griefs, and still works through this painful history together. It's quite a remarkable book, and you're going to, I think, really enjoy hearing her read from it today. Just in keeping with some of the writing courses you're made to take in this school, I found what I think is the thesis of this book, and I'll just read it to you very briefly, and then I'll let Cara Lyn do the rest of the talking here. So how in my lost language, she says, in my empty apartment, in my brown skin, can I speak our sorrow? What word in Michif, that's the Métis language, Michif, captures the wail at the hollow of my throat? How do I heal past the rhythm of slave songs? I will collapse beneath the weight of namelessness. This book is about Cara Lyn trying to bring the names back into her story, and I think you're going to really enjoy her saying those names. So would you please welcome Cara Lyn Morgan to the stage.
Thank you for coming. You have to bear with me, I'm getting over a cold, so if you can't hear me, just wave your hand and I'll do my best to speak up a little bit. If I start to run out of steam, I'll think of some way to interact and save my voice. As Laurie said, this was my first collection. I wrote it mainly as a university student at University of Victoria. It started out as a mess of poems, and it was just a process of my working through the loss of some family members. And as I worked through this individual grief, I was akin to a grief that was much wider. In losing members of my family, I recognized that I was losing pieces of my own history, and also my ability to access that history through the storytelling of the past. And I felt that I was frantically gathering up the stories of my grandparents, because I knew that once those people were gone in my life, that also would be gone those stories, and I would be without them. In trying to find out who I was in this country, I had to be able to tap into who my family was. Before I start reading, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. My mother's family is seventh generation Métis. They come from Saskatchewan. The Métis are a Plains Cree French-Canadian hybrid, Métis meaning mixed. They've been in this country for as long as the family can remember. In the cultural sense, they say that a woman fell from the sky and landed on the back of a great turtle, and that is how our people came to this country. My father's family are from the West Indies, Trinidad and Tobago, and are a product of the transatlantic slave trade, meaning that they were brought to this part of the world as cargo. When I started reading about my history, my family history, those two realities became very oppressive to me in trying to then write my own specific story. So I bring in the voices of the past through this, and if you'll bear with me, I'm going to bring in some family ghosts as well. I'm going to do something that I just started doing, and I'm actually going to read the poems in order that they appear in the book. So it's a social experiment. Oh, sorry. The first poem, Le Coeur de Laurel, for Grandma Kane. Use your latex finger to nudge the lungs aside, expose the twist of arteries meshed over gathered trachea, a picket fence protecting the pull and release of the final breath. Run the scalpel down the outer wall of the coronary sulcus and slice free a heavy wedge of birthday cake. Laurel's last white cake showed 86 in chocolate frosting. Sniff your incision. It should smell like a handful of frozen dimes, the tops of hammers, a hint of ocean salt, a wet saline mist puffed up from the dark coulee you've revealed. Deep inside the vortex of the coronary sulcus is the dip of the interarterial groove. Find it. Here, 11 babies with goldfish mouths clung to heavy breasts. Patrick, Therese, Gerard, Kathleen, Jacqueline, Paulette, Shelley, Daniel, James, Francis, Joanne, twined around each other, crowding the cavity like puppies in a laundry basket under the basement steps. Cut, cut, cut. Feel the trachea through the sponge of skin, cut the custard edge of the pericardium. The scalpel should glide to the place where Father Ed died, autumn 1976. Just below, in the right auricular, pictures of Ed as a boy, not yet a priest, one lazy pant leg rolled up on his shin. Press. Reach the cut line between the right and left ventricle. Spread Laurel's heart wide, two halves of a mango on the countertop. Locate the terminal sulcus and stick your finger in. Refer to the line of union. Here, the day Laurel married Protestant Irish Métis John William Kane. She wore a handmade dress. He smoked a hand-rolled Marlboro. Lower on this line, the day their daughter Therese married a Caribbean boy, Humboldt, 1970. She wore a sequined pantsuit. In the terminal crest, 2 of her 11 gone, Shelley and then Patrick. Snug in the fibers of the musculi pectinati, 1 girl, 1 boy, woven together like strong brake wires. Pluck the corde tendinisse. Christmas, 1933. A new plow horse. Summer, 1941. Brother Armand off to war. Summer, 1947. Became a wife. Autumn, 1947. Became a mother. Pluck, pluck away. Fiddle strings, uncorded melody of passing days. And the final cut. Within the creases of the coronary sinus, 30 fat and freckled grandchildren tumbled around one another, fluffed towels in the dryer. Peer in there. In the nook of the fossa ovalis, you will find me, behind my sisters and beside two cousins, tight together, a braid of still, damp hair. Stick your thumb in and touch me gently. Incochish piten, nijaminen, which is the mitzvah for the words I touch, I taste. If you're not familiar with mitzvah, it's a combination of Plains Cree and French. So some of the words sound a little French and some of them sound a little Cree, and I don't speak either very well, so if there's anyone in here who speaks mitzvah, I apologize. My pronunciations are probably going to be a little sketchy. But anyway. There is my grandfather, his hair pressed flat by an ancient baseball cap, eyes hidden beneath the dusted brim. There, he speaks to himself, saying, "The Shani Kashan, John Kane," his breath whiskey. There, beneath his railway clothes, on the brown surface of his skin, the apparent Métis plains, unsettled rebellion, his mother. There she is, hidden beneath the vestment of an Irish name. Mabel, there behind the Legion bar, banging the stained wood with her withered fist. Awena Kia, her voice a cold brook. My grandfather, his glass to his lips. Who are you? Her question. I am no one, he says. He says this so his children may never be called half-breed, Injun, buffalo jockey, squaw. Coal cutter, yes. Mick, leprechaun, but never Tonto, never knit. And the ghost, her hand on his glass, saying, "Nkochish piten, nijaminen," and a secret is swallowed for 70 years. Here is my grandfather, his hand on my hand while we sit on the sun porch. I am his 10th granddaughter. There are 20 others after me. Times like this, I wish I was still a child. I would wrap myself around his knees. There is a fog from our breath in the cold, and he says, "The Shani Kashan, John Kane," he says, "Nkochish pitan, nijaminen." I was never nameless, but now I am named Monkman, the old name. His tongue calls back the words I may never understand, but there are no questions this morning, for the secret is his. I have secrets of my own. So the collection basically rose out of the loss of a great man in my life, my Uncle Patrick, who was my eldest uncle. And I was raised by a bunch of wild hippies in Saskatchewan, and he was the wildest. He didn't come home until he was stricken with cancer. He sort of came and went in our lives, and then he came home because he was ill, and I spent the last 2 years of his life with him. And he died on Halloween night, which was, if you knew him, about right. So this poem is called Halloween Night. A hearse in the drive. Witches press their faces to its windows and wiggle the door handles, seeking a glimpse of the dead. Inside the house, my Uncle Patrick lies like someone sleeping, not dead at all. When they came to pull the last tube from his wrist, I wanted to lick where the needle was. My mother touched his forehead, the hollows of his cheeks. She still remembers the sound of his rubber ball against their garage, 22 smashing green glass bottles behind the barn. His clothes torn from playing in the old switchyard, and how he drove their father's Beetle into the salt lake to to see if it would float. I remember licking unbaked cheesecake from his fingers as a kid while he drank lambs and 7, and how he taught me to braise a brisket of freshly killed moose. Halloween night, and we are the undead. My cousin Samuel puts his hands on my cheeks and asks why. Why can't we go out trick-or-treating? I push him away too hard, and he cries, his clown face muddied in tears, and I feel better for it. I drink whiskey from a weighted glass, eat candy while my middle-aged auntie smoke Patrick's stash in the upstairs bathroom and weep fat, slow tears. My grandmother wears her rosary around her knuckles like a weapon, but does not pray. Thumb pressing the Damascus pebble against her first and second finger, and Patrick sleeps in the crypt of the hearse, which the neighbors realize is not a prop. They bustle their devils and demons away, but the older children will sneak up the driveway. Though I am the one with your blood in my body, for Father Ed Brochu. At Patrick's wake, the uncles spoke of your funeral, of the autumn drive through the prairie, and I learned that Patrick's first name was Edward, and that you both were buried in fall. There is a friar here who knew you. Clasp your hand, your broad shoulder, who remembers your laughter and the news of your passing. And though I am the one with your blood in my body, here is this man who shared morning coffee, split a sandwich, heard your confession. He tells me you had a stutter and that your funeral was on my birthday. What I know are from times my grandmother spoke your name, storytelling, said, Eddie, tapped your image with her fingernail, nodded as if you still lived, the boy she had cradled. In the pictures, your sisters are always touching you until youth stretched you, your big arms wrapping your tallest sister tight, tighter. In the pictures, you were always smiling, perhaps because you were a priest with the boyishness of a man whose heart was never broken. If you'd lived, you would have baptized me, heard my first confession, given me my penance, and washed me in the blood of Jesus. You would have sat at Patrick's bedside, fed him his last rites, the sacrament of the sick. You are here tonight with my uncles pressed in around his coffin. So the next poem I'm going to read, it's referencing the Indian Registry. Basically, in its most simplified version, it's just a big list that the government of Canada kept of the native people in the country. Specifically, this list is from those that were related to me in Saskatchewan. So in searching for my family history, I was just given this list of names with no other information really. So as I was reading this in the hopes of earning access to a great history, I actually just had a list of names. So reading this list of names, I find myself stricken. An infant lost in the wild prairie, thistles and thorny grass bloodying my skin. Tonight, Li Nusim, the granddaughter, I want to relearn my tongue. I speak their names, a stumble in this tongue I know, the Moniao tongue, the white man's tongue, that replaced their spirit names with Bible names incorrectly spelled. I ask them to return to me in the smudge of sage, let me not be abandoned. Ninokums, long abandoned, all but these dust-soft pages, these blurred photos, stern, heavy women. I want to hold their black braids like an ox tether. I want to wrap their woolen shawls across my shoulders. I call to my body the whirl of the old fingerprints, that they may enter me like thunder, lit tonnerre that shakes the barn and flickers the lights. In my most quiet calling, I speak their grandmother names, the left behind names, the only names that remain. Sophia Bird, born 1792. Catherine, second wife of Henry Hallett, first wife, unnamed, called Indian. Catherine, daughter of Marie Pruden. Suzette, born 1815, Clementine, mother of Catherine, who married a Scotsman. Margaret Monkman, born 1832, Nancy Bird, mother of Charlotte, dateless. Caroline Cote, born 1847, Mary Inkster, born 1848. Come awake, Mabel Monkman, born 1853, my mother's grandmother, Mabel Monkman with the white bone lighter who clipped horse-shaped barrettes in my mother's hair. Remember to me the warm salt smell of bannock in the outside oven, the smoke of walleye on the river stones. Enter me like the poplar fluff that whitens the roadsides and covers the grass. Remember to me my spirit name. Let me not be forgotten. So part of the writing the collection had to do with striking a balance between telling one part of my family history and the other part of the family history, and trying to weave them together in the context that the thing I realized was that colonialism on a whole, it's kind of the same everywhere. It is a thing. And so what I found were unexpected parallels between the colonization of the West Indies and the transatlantic slave trade and the colonization of Canada. So I think what I was attempting was a loose braid of these histories in the context of what it meant to me. So this one is called These Tears They Do Not Fall. For the Cree wives of the Norwest Company, rugged men who bounced in their beds, brought pale-skinned babies into wilderness homes, kneeled them in makeshift churches, then left. Returned to the cities when winter was over, bellies full once the buffalo returned. For the Indian school's vacant swings, the children beaten in the night, their secret skin, and the Bible-less click of the lost languages. For those light-skinned girls who learned to pass, who cut their hair, corseted breasts and whalebone, forgot the smell of sweetgrass smoke, thick pemmican on the tongue, and married well. For the runaway slaves inside pianos, pine coffins, feather mattresses, the false bottoms of merchant wagons. The ones who crowded the bottleneck at Amherstburg, bleeding amid the hunting hounds. For those who sang of the drinking gourd, limbs, ice in the bounding streams of Georgia, Mississippi, who came to dry their feet in the soil of Ontario and found Canada a very cold place indeed. For the ones who worked the CPR to own their land on the Bedford Basin and dared request the luxury of running water, electric lights. And so we drink down tears, river water in cupped hands, swallow them hard, keep them like fireflies. If there is one, there are thousands. In prayer to recover the lost names for their grandmother ancestors. Let me call the sun Li Saleh and the earth Pasquawaski. When it is snowing, let me say Mishpun. And when the rain mists the alder groves, let me remember Kiniwan. Let me call the rivers Lisapi and the mountains Wasaya. Let the prairie be Le Prairie, and the pond behind the barn Lissiluk, with the brown ducks swimming. Let the brown ducks be sisipak. Let the blackbird be kakakayos. And the black bear be mokwa. When he appears on the hillside, let the hillside be ishpatina. Remember to me jackfish and coyote and elk and crow, lebrosha and mishkakakanis and waskiso and ohaso. When I am barefoot on the spring brown grass, let the grasses be kapaskwa. And when the sky descends blue along the horizon, let the blue be le bleu. Remember to me brown and gold and grass green, le chapola and oshal sonias and la vert. Remember to me sipisis, the cold stream where the good crayfish hide, and to my lips the old names, the Wakomakanak names, ancestor names, Laura and Mabel, Laurel, Nokums. Let me not be the lonely bending foxtail, wordless and wild. So leaving the prairies will bring in some Trinidad, make my dad happy. This one's called They Have Seen These Stories, They Know. There are as many as hummingbirds, as streaks of sunlight through the open window. In the evenings, I spy them, half-drunk glasses of rum caught up. Our fathers, so slight, they appear just to be men falling asleep after dinner. The stories spiral, how we became lost, the daughters, why we disappear like steam. Maybe we were not loved enough, and they were not loved enough. We do not sleep with their stories, forgotten between these shores and the old ones. We, daughters cold and thin in the prairie, silent as the hard-packed snow, awake in our husks of yellow skin. So I should have said this earlier. The reference was to Father Ed. He was actually my great uncle. He died before I was born. But I had these very strange parallels with him. As I stated in the other poem, he was buried on the day of my birthday, which would have been a few years later. He also baptized everyone in the family up until me. I was the first that wasn't baptized by him. He was kind of the favorite of my grandmother, so she used to tell these very kind of comical stories, which if you went to Catholic school, finding comical stories about a priest on the prairies is not as easy as you would think. So it was always kind of charming to think of him pre-priest years. So I was going through the photos of that my grandmother had of her life when she was young. I came across a photo of Father Ed on his graduation from seminary college, and it happened that I was at a friary in Saskatchewan at the time that I discovered this photo, and it was just coincidentally this meeting of friars, and many of the people in the photo were actually there. And so I was able to garner these stories about my great uncle, someone who I had never known in his priest life, from all these random priests. So that's where the poems about Father Ed came from. So this one's called Photo of Father Ed, Graduation, Seminary College. The day he ceased to be just Eddie. Cluster of mischievous boys, grins wide and prideful, soon to be the savers of prairie souls. Mothers placed their faith in the palms of these young men. Farmers sweated out their secrets to them through wooden screens. They are all gone now, and nobody remembers their names. Nobody knows if their faith carried them through to the next world. There was a great party the day they buried Father Ed. The friars drunk on whiskey and pitchers of red wine. The priests and family sang and wept, and this became the grieving ceremony, a wolf pack walk from church to grave, the hush of ending amid the howl. To each of us. She gives her fingers the tender petals of her thumbs. We gather these in cedar baskets, float them down South Saskatchewan. They are the infant Moses. To her 5 sons, she gives her rough-hewn palms, the left for cupping clean water, the right to cradle blue dragonflies and lady slippers. At evening grace, we fold them together, the left hand, the right hand. In summer, make shovels to till the earth. At harvest, they are the cool husks sifting inside the dark silo. To her 6 daughters, she gives her arms crossed on her chest. We sew a great strong sail. We move outward, draw walleye to the boat's sides. To her granddaughters, she gives her 12 ribs. These we gather like daffodils, weave their stems through our heavy braids. They are the Trinity, the cleanest part. To her husband, she gives back the nest of her womb, cradle for the 11 who slid out like kittens steaming on white linen. To him, these are the cavities of the heart, the story's end. Her fingers beneath his chin the night she died, a shoeless walk to the spirit place, coming back to the ones who walked ahead. And this goodbye. I know by our hug this morning, this is the last I will see of you, your life. You are so small today, so pale. Your life ballooned in the middle like the curve of a toddler's belly, then slendered out again, and you have gone quiet. The tumor in your stomach feeds on the nutrients from your food, and you starve. I sift through your photos, picture after picture, gather names, places, final stories, while your eyes fade backward in time. This is all we get from the woman who held us, because the first funeral is the hardest, and then they just run on. The thing that amazes us most is autumn. The cold kettles in like a hawk, unshy. Frost coats the door handles, that miracle of breath in and out. Blue crocus, aflame on a colorless stretch of snow. I think this is the first poem I wrote for this collection. I wrote it when I was very young, so it feels like a young poem when I read it. It's called Monok, Monok, for my uncle. Monok, Tande Pieto Tayan. The sky above Saint Louis is starry and cold, and I wonder if I only imagine heaven because of my grief. From there, can you see Les Charans? Are you arrested by beauty, even there? Mononc, inistur kitachiman. I call up your voice, a sharp, cool rumble, like handfuls of gravel in a ragged palm. You told me once to learn the language of our nokums, our motions, so I could speak to the ancestors and be heard. And now you are one of them. Mononc, I think of you often in the jazz club in Kelowna. I was 20, and you wore your navy sport coat. You called Jesus through the music, and I was ashamed in the room of quiet white people and envious. Mononc, in those last days, I wasn't there for you. Was not brave enough to touch Talmain, to sit with you, sink my head on your damp pillow, answer when you cried through the morphine in our silent, sleepless house. On your funeral day, I came to the room where you died and began, matut, to cry. But the truth, many nights I drank quiet my grief and asked God often why he made me suffer. And I think I'm going to end on this one. It's called Was Called Home. And again, you have to bear with me because there's a little patois in here, and I get pretty Saskatchewan when I try to do the Trinidadian accent, so sorry. The 100-year-old woman leans back into her wheelchair and locks bent fingers across her chest. She has buried her eldest child. First son, she tells me. He just slipped away one night, was speaking with his brother, and then just fell to sleeping. Her eyelids slipped downward, was called home, she says. Everyone love he so. Her words filter through lost front teeth. Me left my tears in Trinidad, and now it's time to be with the family. She and I know that is all. Loss, a knowing you have no choice but to press forward, left foot before right. She tells me, someday you're gonna be called home too. Her crooked palm tilts skyward, and then she rests. 100 years, the startled blooming of the untrimmed poinsettia that crowds the front gate in December, the coming of the rainy season after the dry, the ibis cry. Thank you. I heard that you may have some questions, so if anybody has questions to ask, I'm happy to answer.
What is your family's reception?
Everyone's been asking me that. I can tell you that they were pretty excited about the physical book. I think whenever you have a writing degree, it's just a relief when there's a physical book at the end of it. I have noticed definitely that they're a lot more cautious of the types of stories they tell around me. But I think there was this sort of feeling of writing history and trying to keep the family stories alive. So I think there was a little bit of a relief at having these stories that we had sort of been telling each other over bottles of whiskey, at the table at midnight, to have them physically written down so that we could actually identify, especially once my grandparents passed away. Originally, the whole collection was focused on the Saskatchewan side of the family, and my dad got very antsy and he said he had to write about the Trinidadian side of the family. And then I wrote about the Trinidadian side of the family, and he got a little uncomfortable because he was worried that he was going to come across looking bad. So I had to sort of strike a balance to make sure that I was still respecting the truth, but also respecting the fact that these people are still alive. So, I think they're pleased. I think they're very glad that I stopped writing family poems after this collection. So, okay.
When you write your poetry, do you write into the first draft the rich imagery that you use, or do you interweave the imagery in a second draft or a later draft?
If I'm really lucky, that imagery can come in the early drafts. I write everything longhand, and then until I'm ready for the editing process, so everything is written longhand, which slows me down. And a lot of the time the images arrive before the poem, just by nature of navigating through the world. I think poets especially are very perceptive to small little images in the world. So as I walk down the street and I see a one-legged pigeon, all of a sudden there's a poem there. I don't know what it's going to be about, but I know I like that image. But yeah, I think as you go through the further editing process for me, I definitely try to plump up my work, and then I almost always have to scrape it back and start pulling out those images. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
What one's your favorite poem?
Sorry?
What one's your favorite poem to share with people?
In the collection? Oh, depends on my mood. I think the one that's the most fun to read for me is the one with all the Michif words. But I'm very self-conscious about it because I am very keenly aware. Michif wasn't spoken in my family. It was a language that was lost, and I had to teach it to myself, meaning I had to learn it from the internet. And the problem is that because it's a language of an indigenous tradition, when you look at it online, depending on what community you're looking at, the spellings are different, the pronunciations are different, and I was finding it very overwhelming to try to actually use the proper words. What I decided was that the fact that I don't know this language is actually more important than knowing it properly, because it says more about my family, in my opinion, and the fact that it is a language that has been generally lost over the generations, so it's speaking to that larger cultural grief. So in terms of, I think it's fun to read. It's one of the only ones that has rhyme in it, which is, rhyming is always fun. But I like to read any of the poems about my family because I feel like especially the poems about people who have passed on. In our tradition, in our family, we say that when you speak the names of the dead, they're drawn to the room, and they are physically present in the room. And so I always feel like when I incant their names, it's like they're here. So.
On that note, what can be done to reclaim and preserve these sort of lost languages?
I think speaking them is very important. The tragedy, I can't speak for all First Nations languages, but I can speak specifically for my family. The tragedy of Michif in my family was that I came from a generation of family that passed for Irish and wanted very badly to convince the world that they were Irish, so they would never speak Michif. My grandfather, it wasn't until the very end of his life that he was willing to even acknowledge the fact that he was Métis. So everything that we learned about our family history, other than the stuff that had been recorded by the government, was done of our own accord, my cousins and my sisters. And it's very hard to do that when you're not given the guidance of your elders. So I think speaking the languages are very important. I think learning the names of the plant life and animal life around us is important in terms of knowing how to navigate in this country, and recognizing that these things had names before first contact. The Michif words came after first contact because the Métis didn't exist before first contact, but in the very early stages of the country. I think that we also have to strive to see an importance culturally in this country for our Indigenous languages. You see it in the north a little bit more, but I think we get so focused on French or English, we fail to recognize that there are a great many languages and stories that were told in this country before those two languages arrived.
You was mostly about your family history in your poems. Are you writing about like other topics, or do you have plans to write on other topics?
Yeah, my teacher, Lorna, told me after I wrote this book that I needed to fall in love so that I could stop writing family poems. I don't write love poems, but I did recognize that I had been writing the same poems for about 4 years. My next collection, which I'm just entering into the editing stage, is actually more about maps and a little bit about the landscape of Canada, but it's mostly about an injury that I sustained that I had to work through, and so there's a lot of anatomical maps and physical maps of the country, the railway lines in the country. So there's still a little bit of family stuff, but it gets a little self-indulgent to just write. And they gave me such good material that it felt, I felt like I needed to steer away and let them do their thing, and then we'll go back to the family poems once they let their guards down again. So.
What I found striking about your poem was the absence of I. Even though you were present there in various stages with various family members, you were so completely braided in, to use your image, with your family members that I was born a Crozier. I want to hear what your I is.
Yes.
Is that partly intentional in this volume, that you are completely within your family?
Definitely. I think it was more of an observational quest writing this book, and it had a lot to do because grief is such an internal thing and it is such a personal thing. I think part of the process of writing these grief poems was taking myself out of them, so that I wasn't making a mess with my emotions all over the place. Definitely the second collection is a lot more self-indulgent because it's about me and this injury and laying on my couch being unable to move, feeling sorry for myself. So I appear a little bit more physically, and also I think because a lot of these are memories from my childhood. They're being told from my eyes, from my perspective, and so when you see the world through your own eyes, you don't see yourself in it. So I think that's maybe where that is coming from. I have some weird things about the actual physical presence of the word I on the page, and do you capitalize it and do you not capitalize it? That's like poet madness, so it's always a hard choice. So, yeah.
Your poetry and the way that, especially you speak about your family and about your music culture, do you see that as a form of decolonization with everything that's more on the mainstream that we say about decolonizing and breaking down barriers and things like that? I personally feel that it's definitely one of decolonization and just being honest with both of those lifestyles.
I don't know if I was consciously thinking about decolonization as much as colonization and its long-term effects. But what I definitely believe, and I think what my intention when I began writing this collection, was to make a point that there are families like mine all over this country. And that there are mixed race families and mixed culture families all over the country, and that our stories are relevant, and they are Canadian stories. And I think I remember when I got my Métis status card, and I remember feeling like suddenly I belonged in this country. Like I had proof that I belonged in this country because being mixed race, people identified with the Trinidadian side. And yet I was raised by the Métis side, so I was always fighting against this. No, this is where I'm from, And then I had this card, and I was a card carrying. I'm a Canadian now, and people can stop asking me where I come from. And then I realized that my family has always been here. They've always been here, and so I had just as much right to claim that as anybody who was here. And I don't think that's unique to our country, and I don't think it's unique to the Métis people. I don't think it's unique to any city in this country. In terms of decolonization, this is going to sound really bad, so just bear with me. I feel like in a lot of ways colonization happened. It did, and it sucked in a lot of ways, but it is the country, and the Métis people are born out of colonization. They say that we were born 9 months after first contact, right? So we would not exist without colonization. So I live on kind of a weird border where I can't be completely anti-colonial because my people would not exist here. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for that. But at the same time, I recognize that the countries that my family's history come from are the products of colonialization. And I think it's more about accepting that history and understanding the long-term effects of colonialization in terms of what it did to the people who were there. And once we recognize that, instead of continuously acting like, wasn't that big a deal, guys, you know, once we recognize that, then we move forward as a country.
Thank you very much, Cara Lyn. It's much to think about. And nice to see you all here. Perhaps in another month we will meet again. We have some books here. And thanks again.
I'll just